Working in a funeral home teaches you a lot about silence, about the final farewell, about the weight that hangs in the air when everything has already been said, or when no one wants to say anything more. My name is Jacob. I've been a funeral director for 15 years, and I've seen it all: natural deaths, tragedies, unexplained accidents, families weeping, families cold, families in denial. But on that day, that specific night, something made me realize there are still mysteries death itself cannot conceal. It was a gray Tuesday, the kind of day when the weather feels heavier than the sturdiest coffin. I was alone in the funeral home office, writing up the report from that morning's burial when the phone rang. I answered with the casual ease of someone who knows what to expect, but on the other end, nothing but silence for a few seconds. Then a low, deliberate, almost whispered voice said, "We need a funeral immediately, but it must be completely private. No flowers, no wake, no one." I asked for the deceased's details. The person hesitated, then gave vague info. Male in his 40s, natural causes. Delivery in an hour, payment in cash, up front. I insisted on the death certificate. The reply, "It's with the body," and the document was signed by a family doctor. I hung up with that uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. A secret funeral, no flowers, no ceremony, not even a name on the headstone. In 15 years, I'd never had such a request, but the voice had something about it. Cold authority, someone used to ordering and being obeyed. I told myself I'd seen stranger things. People asking to dress the deceased in costumes, place tarot cards in the coffin, even play club music at wakes. But this was different. This didn't feel like eccentricity. It felt like fear, or shame, or both. I stood, straightened my lab coat, took a deep breath, and went to prepare the receiving room. Part of me hoped this would just be another odd job. Another part already knew it wouldn't be. At that moment, I still thought this was just another weird story in my career. I didn't know that by opening that coffin, I'd be opening a door to secrets that should have stayed buried forever. The call came again about 40 minutes after the first. The voice was different, this time female but equally calm and tense. She confirmed the earlier request. No wake, no service, no flowers or any homage, just the burial. And do it as fast as possible, preferably before dawn. I asked that they send the paperwork. The woman hesitated, then said it would arrive with the body. Payment was already being handled. Cash, dropped off by a driver at the funeral home door. No direct contact. Just a heavy brown envelope containing the exact amount and one cursive phrase: "Maintain silence. For everyone's sake." Outside, the atmosphere felt oppressive. The rain had started, and with it came the sense that this was more than a simple night shift. I logged back into the funeral home system. I tried to find records for the name given. Nothing. No death certificate registered. No hospital records for that name. Not even in the registry office of the next town over. It was as if the man had never existed. Around 11 p.m., the ambulance arrived. 2 men in lab coats, masks, and surgical caps stepped out without a word. They weren't from the local hospital. They handed over the body and left. No signatures, no identification. When I removed the body bag, I noticed it was sealed with black tape. Not protocol, improvised, and ritualistic at the same time. The accompanying file had only 2 fields filled: name of deceased and cause of death, cardiac arrest. No legible signature, no medical license number, just the initials RMV in the lower corner. It felt as though someone wanted this to be forgotten before it even began. I walked to the prep room alone. The funeral home was empty. Silence was absolute. And as I prepared the stainless steel prep table, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A pang of fear. Not fear of what I'd see, but fear of what, deep down, I already knew I was about to uncover. Because this was not a normal funeral. This was a cleanup. I opened the body bag cautiously. In this job, you learn to respect the dead, not just out of ethics but instinct. And at that moment, my instincts screamed. There was something wrong with that body. He was about 45, exactly as they said, wearing a dark tunic made of thick fabric, something you haven't seen since the 70s. No underwear, no shoes. There were marks on his body, not traditional violence, but wear. Fingertips were blackened, nails broken as if he'd clawed at something hard till the end. Round marks on his wrists like bruises from chains or leather straps. And his eyes were sewn shut. Yes, sewn shut. It wasn't medical procedure. It was crude, like someone did it in a hurry, terrified, as if those eyes could not remain open. I stepped back, took a deep breath. The smell was strange, not the common decay odor, but a metallic, dense aroma mixed with wet earth and old iron, the smell of something buried, alive. I went back to the file. Cardiac arrest. The most generic diagnosis I'd ever seen, but also the most useful when hiding the truth. Nothing matched, no surgical scars, no sign of medical treatment, no trace of prior embalming, and strangest of all, he seemed dried from within, as if something had drained all the fluids from his body. Not natural. I checked temperature. The body was near freezing, but the chest was warm. For a moment I thought it was my imagination. I touched again. Skin over the sternum had a slight vibration like something still pulsed weakly inside. And that's when I noticed. He wore a small chain around his neck, hidden under the tunic. A pendant attached. It was an odd pendant, sculpted in darkened metal, engraved with a symbol I'd never seen. Something like an eye surrounded by runes. When I touched it, a chill shot through me. It was warm, as if pulled from fire seconds earlier. I should have stopped right there. But I went on. I tried to move the body onto the prep table, but his muscles were abnormally rigid, more than you'd expect, even for a body hours after death. When I lifted one arm, the fingers closed by themselves. Not a spasm. Something intentional. I dropped my hands, stepped back. The room grew eerily silent. Then the broken wall clock struck once. 3 a.m, the hour of the dead. And in that moment, I knew this body didn't want to be buried. I'm no detective. My job is simple: prepare, preserve, bury. But what stood before me demanded more than professionalism. It demanded courage, and perhaps a touch of madness. After that restless dawn, I waited for sunrise. I did as requested. I laid the body in a simple coffin, no adornments, sealed it. But before locking the urn, I removed the pendant and pocketed it. Not on impulse, but because something told me not to leave it inside. The next morning, instead of resting, I went in search of answers. I started with hospitals, called all in the region for that name. Nothing, no admission, no death record, no recent death with that profile. I tried the medical examiner's office. Zilch. It was like the man had never interacted with any official institution. Then I went to the registry office. I pretended to ask about routine funeral paperwork. The clerk was too friendly, until I mentioned the odd name. His expression changed. He said he couldn't help without authorization from the family. There I realized I was dealing with something bigger, something involving influential or dangerous people. I returned to the funeral home and researched the pendant, took photos, uploaded them to ancient symbolism forums. Some responses, links to Eastern European occult sects. Others, ancestral funeral cults believing certain dead should not be buried in common soil, that they needed to be contained with amulets. But the most disturbing was an email I got soon after posting. Subject: "You have it with you?" Body read: "If he's not buried correctly, he comes back, and next time, he won't come alone." I deleted it, but by then it was too late. I felt I'd crossed an invisible boundary when I touched that pendant, and now part of it was inside me too. I returned to the slip that came with the body. At the bottom corner, like a fading seal, was a crest. It looked like a traditional family coat of arms, but oddly styled. 2 lions, a central eye, and a Latin inscription, Non omnis moriar. I translated, "Not all of me will die." That's when a memory struck. 17 years ago, a young woman from town, a politician's daughter, vanished mysteriously. Searches, uproar, rumors of kidnapping. But nothing was found. Except one unexplained detail. The girl wore a chain with a pendant nearly identical to the one I now held. What if the man in the coffin wasn't just a stranger? What if he was part of that buried past? Or worse, the secret that family tried to hide for nearly 2 decades and was now resurfacing. The mist hadn't cleared when they arrived. The burial was scheduled for 7 a.m., an hour no one chooses willingly. And as requested, no flowers, no notice, no public ceremony. Just me, the gravedigger, and 2 family members. They pulled up in a black vintage car with no plates. They exited slowly, dressed in dark clothes. A man and a woman. Both looked 50 to 60, but exhaustion on their faces seemed centuries old. Their wrinkles spoke of guilt, loss, perhaps something darker. The woman held something wrapped in a dark satin cloth. Her eyes, hidden behind sunglasses, stared at me with an intensity I'll never forget. The man barely spoke. He moved like a shadow beside her, steps stiff, almost ritualistic. We opened the coffin before them, as protocol dictates. The body lay still and cold, but it carried that strange tension, as if something was merely dormant. The woman whispered something in a language I didn't recognize, then placed the satin package inside the coffin. The gravedigger, used to quick burials, watched in silence with an expression that said, "This isn't normal." That's when I noticed something strange. Despite being sealed, the coffin began to emit a faint sound, wood creaking under pressure. The gravedigger looked at me, then at the family. No one spoke. Then, with a firm gesture, the man pulled a small white envelope from his pocket and slid it silently into my hand. Sealed with red wax. The woman closed the coffin with her own hands, as if sealing a pact. The gravedigger crossed himself, but no one responded. Within minutes, the coffin was lowered into the reserved plot, an isolated vault, away from other graves, as if death itself needed to keep its distance from that man. When the earth hit the coffin, a sudden chill ran through me. The wind blew fiercely even though skies were clear, and for a moment I heard something. I can't explain. A whisper, a voice, or just my mind, already too deep in all this. Before leaving, the woman turned to me for the first time and said one sentence. "If anyone asks, he never existed." Then they got in the car and disappeared down the road. I stayed for a few minutes, envelope in hand, burdened by the weight of what had just happened. I knew it wasn't the end. I knew that burial had been only the beginning. I waited until the gravedigger left. I pretended to be organizing papers while watching the black car vanish. Only when I was completely alone in the cemetery, silence pressing in, did I allow myself to open the envelope. The red wax seal bore a barely perceptible inscription, the same Latin phrase from the file's crest, Non omnis moriar. This was no coincidence. It was message. It was warning. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were 3 items. First, a faded black and white photo of a young woman, perhaps 20, sitting in an old garden. She smiled, but her eyes, those eyes seemed to know too much. On the back, in faded blue ink, one line. "If you find my body, don't let it see the light." The second item was an old newspaper clipping. Date June 17, 2006. Headline, Politician's daughter disappears after solstice party. The article mentioned a private event, a close family ceremony, selective guests, held on a remote estate. The girl in the photo, Clara M. Villar, was never seen again. The case was covered up by her father's influence, and soon searches ceased without explanation. The girl's name, Clara M. Villar, M.V., like the initials on the file, RMV. Could the R have stood for Raphael? Brother? Cousin? Husband? The third item took my breath away. A small piece of tracing paper filled with hand-drawn symbols in charcoal. Center image, a body within a circle, surrounded by inscriptions like enchantments, ritual glyphs, arrows, dates, words violently crossed out. And at the center, incomplete ritual, risk of return. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. It was as if all the pieces were falling into place. The man buried did not die of natural causes. He was part of, or the result of, something far bigger, something hidden, something deliberately forgotten. I began asking questions. On the internet, obscure forums mentioned ancient summer solstice practices, tales of sacrificial rituals, transferring consciousness, preserving the soul. And always with a warning, do not interrupt the ritual. The body must sleep with its eyes open. Yet this man had his eyes sewn shut. What they did that night nearly 20 years ago hadn't gone as planned, and this rushed funeral wasn't just another burial. It was meant to silence a failure, to erase a mistake. I locked away the envelope in my most secure drawer, but that night, when I closed the funeral home and drove home, I felt watched. Streetlights flickered. Their beams chopped across the darkness as if something passed through them. And I began to hear whispers when I closed my eyes. That body was buried, but something of him was still out there. Today marks 3 months since that funeral. Since then, life has never been the same. Not fully. At first, I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that the strange body, the urgent request, the sewn eyes, the pendant, were just a bizarre chain of unrelated events. But coincidence wouldn't follow me home. It started with dreams. Always the same figure, a man in a dark tunic standing at the foot of my bed. Eyeless but mouth partially open, oozing something dark and hot. In the dream, he doesn't move, but the feeling is that he wants to say something, or maybe take me with him. Then came signs at the funeral home. Doors I'd locked in the evening were found open. The prep room where that body was handled now constantly smells of wet earth, even on the driest days. The security camera that records everything starts malfunctioning every night between 3:00 and 3:03 a.m. Every night. And every night the same sound on the audio. Something scratching inside a wooden coffin. I tried visiting the grave, just to check. But when I arrived days later, I found the plot fenced off. New fence, signs reading, private property. Purchased secretly by an unregistered company. And the grave? No longer even a headstone. Nothing left. It's as if he was never buried. Yes, I kept the pendant. Locked it in a metal safe, sealed with salt and symbols I found in esoteric forums. I don't know if I believe in magic, rituals, this kind of stuff. But I also can't say I don't. Because one thing I know, that family knew what they were doing. That funeral wasn't to mourn someone's death. It was to prevent his return, to seal him, bury him. But something failed. And now, maybe because I touched what I shouldn't have, maybe because I opened that envelope, I'm marked too. So if you're hearing this story, do what I didn't. Stop when your instinct says something's wrong. Break protocol. Refuse the job. Say no, before the silence you respect in death becomes the echo of something still alive. And never, ever keep something that was buried with dark intent. Because sometimes, what's dead doesn't want to be forgotten, and what was forgotten does not accept eternal rest.